the penultimate aspect of this pastime is Vamana Dev asking for 3 steps, right? So just the 3 steps, teen ka steps, milega, just a little bit, just some steps. But Bali Maharaj is saying, or chahiye? Do you need any more? There's something more. There's like an interaction, but that's the actual ultimate, the climax of the narrative of the story is Vaman, of course, taking these 3 steps. So in between this is a very, very like, interesting, provocative discussion between Bali Maharaj and Shukracharya that many commentators have had a lot to say between that, because in it there's a very interesting discussion between, well, what makes a person a devotee? So, and also very interesting interaction where in this verse we see that Bali Maharaj is not going to do the order of his spiritual master. He will not follow the order of his spiritual master. So that's 2 very interesting things. So the first thing I want to, I had some time to kind of contemplate about how to give or how to speak, and I thought maybe there are ways I could improve. And one way to do that is to at least kind of present some type of a hypothesis, or at least to in some introductory way describe the topic I'd like to share and have a discussion about. The first part I wanted to discuss is this, that I think we've spoken quite a few times, is the idea of the Atma Nivedana and how Bali Maharaj's Atma Nivedana, his full surrender of Atma, the soul, like this full, complete surrender. And I wanted to share that specifically in a particular context because I've been meditating on myself, and that is the principle of the Atithi, the guest. And I want to kind of take an evolution of that idea and see how Bali Maharaj is exceeding in that. Is everything okay, Gorshanji? Everything clear? Can you hear me? Okay. I see. It's a little okay. So the other part, and I hope that's the first point. I want to speak about this Atma Nivedana. And the second part, especially through Atithi, the second thing I want to speak about is this instance where Bali Maharaj is disobeying his guru Shukracharya. And though this is generally a great taboo in a pedagogical tradition, a tradition of a teacher and student, many commentators view this as the right thing, to disobey him. And the question is why. So we should clarify what that circumstance is. I wanted to. And as I was kind of meditating, well, I also had this thought because I had a guest over yesterday. I had a guest and I wanted to treat him. He was an old friend, a person I worked with before. Like it was like a student. He worked for me. And he joined the army and he finished his duty and he came visit and I cooked. I made prasad. And he saw me make the offering. He's not a devotee. He was like, I was like, oh, I finished and I made the offering. And he was like, oh, he's like, it's cool. I just brought to altar. And so I made the offering. And anyway, so I had some ideas to think about the Atithi. What does it mean? I thought of a verse. A verse came to mind that's very popular. And that verse is from Taittiriya Upanishad. Matru Devo Bhava, Pitru Devo Bhava, Acharya Devo Bhava, and then of course Atithi Devo Bhava. And what that means, it's very simple Sanskrit. That's why it's easy for people to memorize. The mother, Matru Devo Bhava, mother is like God. Father, Pitru Deva Bhava, is like God. Acharya Devo Bhava, the Acharya, the teacher, is like God. And Atithi Devo Bhava, also the guest, is like God. And so the idea of the guest, like that was always, it's a very interesting thing, the Atithi, because the word literally, Atithi, means, what is Atithi? A tithi is like a day. When I, as a purohit, when I do a samskara or a yajna, I have to determine what the right tithi is, or what the right nakshatra, but you have to find the right time to perform the sacrifice. So a tithi literally means, the tithi is literally the time, the day, at the time or place. Atithi means not the right time or place. So a guest, the name for the guest encompasses this idea that the guest is not expected. You don't know what to expect with a guest. So it encompasses this idea, and it's it's a lot deeper than you think. Well, than I thought. So like, and actually it also brings us back to the beginning of all of the Bhagavatam, because I never understood. Like, it took a while, maybe a couple of years. I was like, what put Parikshit Maharaj in this situation? Because he was cursed. Why? Because he put a dead snake on a sage. Why? Because he was a guest in that sage's hermitage, and the sage was in deep meditation, and he didn't greet him as a guest. Even in the purport, Prabhupada says, like, if you have a guest, you should at least offer water, something. But this sage was in deep meditation, and of course, maybe Parikshit Maharaj had, there was some maybe pride or just for the Leela, but he was deeply insulted because of this idea of the guest. The guest is a very sacred thing, that to not be treated as such. It's just like Mother Rukmini was saying the other day, when people come to the temple, you have to look at them and see them as Krishna's guests, that Krishna has brought them here, and you should treat them as such. So the idea of the atithi has some pretty deep ramifications, and I was just meditating that in connection with Bali Maharaj. And so the first part of it is that there's a certain aspect of like a bit of a dharma. Well, how about in a practical sense? For example, like I'm older now, but as a young man, when I first lived on my own, what happens when you go into a bachelor's apartment and you go into the refrigerator, you open the door, all you see is glass shelves. There's nothing in there. There's like a bottle of ketchup, maybe half a jar of pickles, and some like leftovers from like 4 weeks ago. Like, there's a certain sense of like, to take care of a guest requires a bit of a sense of maturity and prosperity. Actually, it's a sign of prosperity. That's why when Bali Maharaj says, "Here's Vamanadev, whatever you want, yeah, have. You just want 3 steps? I'll give you an island. I'll give you a kingdom. I have everything. What can I? How else do you show prosperity? What other better way to show a type of prosperity than to be very generous to a person whom you do not know, a guest. Well, specifically a guest. So in that is a bit of a sense of, I would say it's like artha. It's a dharma. That's one phase of this idea of the atithi. It's a sense of prosperity. It's a sense of duty, of doing the right thing. But let's take it another. I thought of it even in a more deeper point idea, is that literally, as a guest comes to the door, you do not know what to expect. And it's a real thing. It's a real thing, because I was in Calcutta once, and I had a friend who was staying at an ashram called Yogata Satsang. He's a friend of mine, he's a classmate. He said, "Come find me at the Yogata Satsang, which is by Kaligat," which is by the old Kali temple that Ramakrishna had been in, and it's like very tight, and it was like nighttime, and I'm wandering through these gullies trying to find this ashram, asking people, "Oh, Yogata ashram, kahan hai?" I'm just trying to find out where it is, and everybody's pointing me to a place, and they finally point me to this house, and I'm like, "Is this Yogata ashram?" And they're like, "Yes." So I go there and I knock, I ring on the bell, and someone comes out. They bring me inside. It's a young woman. She brings me inside, and she brings me to a living room with this old man sitting there, and he says, he's like, "Thank you for coming to my home, and I'm an old man now, and I've seen many things, I'm not sure what I can offer to you, but I want to offer any way I can help. And I said, well, I said, I thank you for, bringing or hosting me and my friend. And I was like, my friend's name is Derek. I was like, is Derek here? And he's like, who's Derek? He had already like brought me water and a little bit of like sweets, and it wasn't even the right place. He had no idea who I was. So and then he said, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to this yoga, the satsang. He's like, oh, that's like down by the river. So he asked the woman who answered the door was his daughter. He spoke to her in Bengali and said, get a rickshaw for him and have it go to yoga the satsang. And he paid for it and everything from a complete stranger. He completely welcomed me, and that was one of my first experiences of that type of hospitality. And so, really, it conveys this idea, right? We don't know, just as we don't know what to expect from a guest. Like, for example, another story was the story of Bilvamangala Thakur, who had approached a well off person, and he's a Gaudiya saint. He had been dealing with some kind of issues of desires, and so he had seen this prosperous man's wife, and he desired her. So he came to approach this man, and the man said, whatever you want as a guest, I offer to you. And Bilva Mangla Thakur, that phase in life, said, I'd like to spend some time with your wife. And the man in that kind of pious interaction said, okay, if that is what you desire, you come from a good family, you are practicing, you're a sadhu. And in that moment where Bilva Mangala Thakur, as we know the story, as he was there in the room with the woman, he just felt an incredible wrongness. And he said, if these eyes are what are preventing me from seeing Krishna, then I don't want them. And he takes the hairpin from the woman's hair and he takes his eyes. And from that point on, he'd become a blind mendicant and singing, praising Krishna. So the idea that idea of not really knowing, it's a complete cultural concept of accepting what fate has brought, and it comes to your door. But it's the same thing to say when we walk outside of that door, we don't know what's outside. We don't know what to expect from the world when we go out into the world, in the same way as that guest comes to the door. So it's conveying this kind of idea that, like, exactly like matra sparsas tukuntiya, sitoshna sukadukada, sita and usha. It's like summer and winter. How do we know? We don't know. We don't know how the seasons. We know that it's cold. We know that it's hot, but we don't know if it's going to rain. The weather is unpredictable for the most part. There's meteorologists that get paid a lot of money, but half of the time they're right. Maybe the technology is better. So this is another kind of idea of the atiti, the higher level. That's that first level of talking about some type of prosperity, of being responsible, being able to take care of someone else. On another level, on a higher level, it's also this kind of samadarshana. It's this Brahma Bhuta phase, this ability to see the world and not be fazed by it, not to be hampered by whatever good or bad may happen. So the atiti, the unexpectedness, the idea of not knowing what to expect, conveys that same idea. That's another level of the atiti. And I think that, and it seems clear that Bali Maharaj understands that idea. But let's take it another level, because I think for many of us, well, for me, I'll say for myself, when I think of mata sparsas kunteya, I think of sitoshna sukha dukkha, that happiness and distress, knowledge means to kind of accept that those happiness and distress are going to happen. and not to be attached to one or the other. That's what Krishna tells us in the beginning of the Gita 2:14. But there's something higher than that. It's higher than just having with an equal mind, seeing this unexpected world of happiness and stress. This is different because this guest at this door is Krishna himself, is Ishvara, and Vamandev is Narayan himself. So what happens when this kind of the prakriti and all the things that happen, the suffering and the happiness, the sukha and the dukkha, do have a reason behind it? Because we could look at it and say, like, I'm not sure of the reasons, but I can accept it. But when you're a devotee, then that sukha and dukkha has a little bit more meaning, or what you might perceive as sukha and dukkha, or those different phases. If you see it in relation to Krishna, and you see it in relation to Ishvara, it can have infinitely more meaning. And so Prabhupada, in this verse, in his purport, he cites that Desham Satata Yuktanam Bhajatam Pritipurvakam, right? The Dami Buddha Yogam Tam Yenamam Upayantite. So that the Dami is what we want. We want Krishna to give us the Dami Buddhi. We want the Buddhi. He will give us the knowledge by which we could come to him. How? Well, we have to have kind of set the environment for it. If you don't have the right mindset, how can you process that knowledge? That's why it has to be Tesham Satata Yuktanam and Bhajatam Pritipurvakam. Because if you give someone knowledge and they don't see it in the context of bhakti, at worst, it's like misery and happiness, and we're just caught in a cycle. On a better level, we just see, well, it's just the cycle of things. But if it's in bhakti, it's a chance to have what is the best opportunity in our life, what the best of life could be, and that's to develop a relationship, an eternal, meaningful relationship with the divine. So the atiti gets taken, that principle of the atiti, the guest, in the case of Bali Maharaj, just takes so many more levels, because it gives him an opportunity to perform bhakti, or to have devotional insight, because this is God at his door. In many ways, God is at our door every day for all of us. We don't know what to expect, but are you looking at it and saying, like, oh, this is just a cycle of life? Or are you seeing that God is trying to communicate with you? A friend told me yesterday that a friend told him in tough, difficult decisions, he said, sometimes God communicates to us through lessons. And that's the way that we have to look at our circumstances. I mean, if we're trying to be insightful or meditative, we should find meaning in the circumstances, instead of just saying, like, oh, it's just samsara. It should have more meaning than that. If God has presence in our lives, if Krishna has presence in our lives. So now this goes into this second part, right? Because I said Atiti Deva Bhava. And that's why the point I wanted to kind of bring out about Bali Maharaj, that there's this idea of Atiti, and it's like, it can get pretty deep, just meditating on how to treat guests. But as I said in this last part of it, he acknowledges that this is Narayan, this is Vishnu. And that's the remarkable thing. He's choosing to go forward. He's choosing to still stay good to his word that he promised, the third step, the 3 steps. Even though Shukracharya is saying, don't do this, because if you do this, he will take everything. You will have nothing. You will have a bad fate. You will go to hell. All of these things will be lost. And Shukracharya is an advisor. So this is other, now this goes into that part where I said there's two parts that I want to discuss. The idea of Atma Nivedanam, and I tried to kind of convey that through the idea of the Atiti and being one, there's one thing of being surrendered and doing your duty and your Dharma. Then there's a higher level, an idea of that Brahmabhuta, that kind of that idea of being okay and accepting the sukha and dukkha, the different phases of it, but on a higher level, seeing it in relation to Krishna. Now, Bali Maharaj is aware of, Bali Maharaj has that insight, but Shukracharya, in many ways, also like us, says, don't do this. Like many people, like we come to Krishna, somebody, well, actually, I read in, if you read in the Tattva Sandarbha in the beginning, it's Jiva Goswami almost puts a warning there that if you don't want to be completely enamored and completely obsessed with pursuing Krishna, then don't continue reading. Because that's the same thing with devotional service. Some people say, like, if you don't want to if you don't want to have your material propensities challenged, don't dedicate yourself. Uh, don't dedicate yourself to this path. Don't give everything to Krishna, because he could take those things. In some ways, he does, because our desires for material things will transform. So Shukracharya is that voice saying, don't do this. Bali Maharaj is like, this is Vishnu. And this is the interesting thing between that's discussed in the commentators. It's almost like an internal discussion. Shukracharya is saying to, listen, like that, he's Vishnu. If you do this, he'll take everything. And Bali Maharaj is saying, listen, he's saying, I promise this, so I'm going to give. But not just that, if you're right, and that's really Narayan, then what can I do anyway? Well, I'm going to give this to him. But it's deeper than that, because he is standing up for that principle. That's Atma Nivedana. It's not like a passive Atma Nivedana. He's actively validating the choice that he's making, and he will go forward with it without pulling back. And well, that is that surrender that Atma Nivedanam is trying to encompass. So now that is, so the question is that I said in the beginning, why is it valid that Bali Maharaj is disobeying his spiritual master, his teacher, right? The word, it actually says it in the verse, Ashraditam Shishyam. He does not have Shraddha. He is a Shishya, a student, a disciple. As it's translated here, he says not very respectful to the instruction of the spiritual master. But we know Shraddha means faith, and he's Ashraditam. He does not have faith in the Guru, because there is a difference between, and Prabhupada says here in the purport, if Shukracharya knows that this is Narayan, this is God, he wouldn't just say, don't do this. If he was a devotee, he will say, hey, this is Narayan. As a friend, I want to let you know that maybe everything will be taken away, but maybe you'll be okay with that. Like if you're a devotee, you say, surrender yourself to Krishna, or surrender yourself to God. This is the chance. This is your opportunity. And maybe you have some hesitation, or maybe you want to do fair warning, but that's not even what Shukracharya is saying. And he curses Bali Maharaj. That's, what is the curse? The curse is that you will lose everything. He says that in the previous verses, that if you do this, you will lose everything. So it's read as, this is a curse. And it is fulfilled in some contexts. But again, it's that principle of the atiti, that idea that, see, there's a difference between that there is a dharma, or maybe a swadharma, and then there's a Bhagavat dharma. And so there's a reality that there will things he will lose. He'll lose his kingdom. But in the context of the Bhagavat dharma, he's attaining the highest kingdom, the highest possibility. And that is really what the focus, or that's what's really important to a devotee. And that's why Bali Maharaj, he will disobey that. He will disobey the orders of his guru, because the order of the guru is instructing him in a way that would move him, is suggesting that he does something that moves him away from Vishnu. Don't do this. Take back your word. Don't agree. But Bali Maharaj has a clear vision about it. He says, if I agree or don't agree, it doesn't matter. This is Narayan. The end result is going to happen. It's better that I willingly do this. I willingly give this. Anyway, so it's those are just two ideas I thought about in my past couple of days. Anybody have any thoughts or would like to share any ideas or anything about those points? Feel free to. I think there's a few minutes left.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, bro.
Yeah.
I had a question. If others, like if anybody else wants to ask, I would give preference first. If not, then I can ask my question. Everybody should be able to unmute themselves. I also sent a specific request. If there is any comments or questions, please feel free to unmute yourself.
I mean, I could also say at least a little bit more. I mean, I know I ended a little early, but there's only a few minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, Prabhupada does say a few things here about Vaishnavas are never concerned with ritualistic smarta brahmanas. And Srila Sanatana Goswami is therefore compiled Hari Bhakti Vilas to guide the Vaishnavas who never follow the smarta vidhi. And he also describes Shukracharya, even though he is the guru, he says that he's only concerned with rites and rituals. Yeah, so it is an interesting thing also to speak about. Hari Bhakti Vilas, if people aren't familiar with this, basically there are two texts that we generally look to when we're performing rituals, and that's Hari Bhakti Vilas and Satkriya Sardipika, but more Hari Bhakti Vilas, because I'm not sure how many people accept Satkriya Sardipika. But the idea is that from a Vaishnava standpoint, perspective, it's a look at ritual from specifically a Vaishnava Bhakti standpoint, so that the focus of those rituals aren't just material ends or worship of demigods. It's meant to kind of guide a person towards developing their devotional life. So I kind of feel as a person who is a ritualist, it's important to clarify some of those things.
Hare Krishna, Kula Pradip.
Hare Krishna,
yeah. Well, I want to ask my question, but I'm also, I didn't speak it right away because I wanted to hear Gorsharan's question. Because mine is just basically asking you to review your class, and I guess I could get that from the recording. So as long as we have time for both. So Gorsharan, what was your question?
Thank you, Gab. My question is, like, when we generally try to compare like Dharma and then we say Bhagavad Dharma is like beyond Dharma. So then it kind of tends to create a subtle uh, culture or a subtle mindset. Oh, Dharma is not so important. I'm
Yeah,
a devotee, so I'm beyond Dharma. Kind of a feeling comes in our general living. So means how do we make sure, like, yes, Bhagavad Dharma is like beyond, but if you see all these situations, Parikshit Maharaj, Bali Maharaj, they're all like emergency situations. They're like kind of very extreme situations. I'm not
yeah,
sure how many of us would go through such circumstances in life,
yeah.
but we just take lessons. But how do we make sure like we don't just in our general living uh, like assume Dharma is not so important or something like that?
Right,
Is
right.
that just is that I'm making up a question, or you think some that kind of an attitude sometimes comes into
No,
devotee?
I get a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of people that see like a transcendence as priority, which isn't wrong. And I've said this before, and I think other people like my friend Dina, we talk about it a lot. Theology is two parts. You have a transcendent God beyond the material, and then you have the immanent God. And that means God in the world. So when people are so quick to kind of dismiss the God in the world just for transcendence, I don't think it's wrong. But I would say, why not take advantage of what's here? We have so many things in the world, like devotee sangha, we have deities, we have scripture. These all things exist. Yes, they're transcendent. It's shabda. It's transcendent in a way. Even when we say words, when we write words, when we see form, it's it's transcendent in many ways. But you realize that it's kind of in contact with the world. So as far as dharma goes, um, I truly believe, especially with varna ashram, and I know that's controversial, but those are paths to liberation. To do your dharma is supposed to develop in you uh, aspects that would lead to spirituality. It might not be, bhakti is completely independent. I mean, that's a very a theological point we have to be clear about. Bhakti is independent. It doesn't mean that I do varnashram dharma that it's going to give me bhakti, but it does bring us to a point. It starts bringing us closer to a point where we can have a better understanding of what it requires to come to bhakti. That's right. Satta pajitam pratipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam. But again, even like the Brahma Bhuta Prashanatma Nasachiti Nakangshati Samasarveshu Bhutishu Mad Bhaktim Labate Param. That means that a person who has this vision of seeing things equally, then that person is qualified or can become my devotee. So take those dharma, and if you see it in a way that you see it where it's developing, like what patience, compassion, you know, um, idea of sacrifice or selflessness, then maybe it's bringing you in the right direction. So that's why when people say forget this dharma, I know we have sarva dharma parityagya, but that we always look at as the negative part of it. What about 1865? There's a positive side to it. It says abandon these varieties of dharma, but before it he says man manabhava madbhakto mam yaji mam namaskuru. He's giving you the positive in what to do. We always, for me, I put those two verses together. It's like a pravritti and a vritti. You can do this. You don't do this. It means like whatever dharma that is that doesn't have this man manabhava mad bhakto, don't do it. But even if you're doing your dharma, just make sure you're thinking of me. Make sure you're doing it in the right mindset. So that's the rule. I think for dharma and for people quick to abandon dharma. I don't know. Sometimes it's an aspect of immaturity. I think, especially for young people like myself. I'm pretty sure I know I was like that, just kind of abandoning what you're supposed to do, drop out of college or, quit your job and move into the ashram, which is good. But, at some point you realize like, well, I have a duty now. There's better ways that I can help my community. There are better ways that I can help give people Krishna in the world. And by just forgetting your duty, uh, you could you could go backwards a little bit.